People think the truth will set you free, but what they don't tell you is that first, it's going to make you miserable. I've sat across from thousands of people over the decades, and I can tell you that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones we tell other people, they're the ones we tell ourselves. You see it in the way someone sits, the way they avoid eye contact, and the way they cling to a narrative that clearly isn't working for them. This story, the one I'm about to tell you, wasn't just about a secret. It was about a total collapse of reality in a family that from the outside looked like the American dream. But as I always say, you can't manage what you don't measure, and this family was measuring their lives by the wrong metrics entirely. They were measuring success by how they looked in a Christmas card while their foundation was rotting right beneath their feet. I remember the day Elena and Marcus walked into my studio. You could feel the tension coming off them like heat off a blacktop in July. Elena was a woman who clearly took pride in her appearance. Every hair was in place, her posture was perfect, almost rigid. She had that "I've got it all under control" smile that usually tells me someone is about to snap. Marcus, on the other hand, looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 years. He was defeated, his shoulders were slumped, and he had this look of utter confusion, the kind you see on someone who just realized the floor they're standing on is actually a trap door. The central problem was presented to me as a financial misunderstanding and some communication issues. That's what they told my producers. But I knew better. My internal radar was screaming, "You don't come to me because of a misunderstanding. You come to me when the house is on fire and you've run out of water." Elena was wearing the label of the perfect wife and mother, while Marcus was being branded as the angry, controlling husband. But as I looked at the files before they walked out on stage, I saw a trail of missing money, secret credit cards, and a history of lies that would make a con artist blush. The truth was, Elena had been hiding a secret for 6 years, and it had finally blown up in her face. Before we get into the explosion, we have to talk about how the fuse was lit. You have to understand that people don't just wake up one day and decide to destroy their lives. There's a pattern. There's always a pattern. I spent some time digging into Elena's backstory, and it was classic. She grew up in a household where good wasn't good enough. Her father was a high achiever who only showed affection when she won a trophy or brought home a perfect report card. If she wasn't perfect, she was invisible. That's a heavy burden for a child to carry, and she carried it right into her marriage. She felt that her value as a human being was tied directly to her ability to maintain a certain lifestyle, a certain image. She thought that if she ever showed a crack in the armor, if she ever admitted that she couldn't handle the pressure, then Marcus would stop loving her just like her father did. When they got married, Marcus was a hard worker, but they weren't wealthy, they were comfortable. But for Elena, comfortable felt like failure. She started small, a little shopping here, a hidden receipt there. She wanted the best clothes for the kids, the best furniture, the best vacations. She wanted everyone at the country club to think they were winning, but she was doing it on borrowed time and borrowed money. She told herself she was doing it for the family, that she was protecting Marcus from the stress of their financial reality. That's the lie she told herself so she could sleep at night. She wasn't protecting him, she was betraying him. She was robbing him of the right to know the truth about his own life. By the time the escalation started, Elena had opened 14 different credit cards in Marcus's name without him knowing. She was intercepting the mail, she was calling the bank, pretending to be his assistant, and she was robbing Peter to pay Paul every single month. It was a house of cards, and a stiff breeze was about to come through. The stress of maintaining this lie started to change her. She became defensive, paranoid, and eventually she started gaslighting Marcus. When he would ask why the savings account wasn't growing as fast as it should, she would turn it around on him. She'd tell him he was being paranoid, that he didn't trust her, that he was being financially abusive just by asking to see the bank statements. This is where the escalation got ugly. Marcus started to doubt his own sanity. He's a smart man, an engineer, someone who deals in facts and figures, but his wife was telling him that 1 + 1 didn't equal 2, and because he loved her, he wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that he was the problem. The tension in the house was suffocating. The kids were starting to notice. They saw their dad becoming a shell of himself and their mom becoming a hyper-vigilant, high-strung mess. The arguments were no longer about money. They were about everything. They were about how he breathed, how he parked the car, how he didn't appreciate everything she did for the family. She was building a wall of resentment to hide the mountain of debt she'd created. The breaking point happened 3 months before they came to see me. Marcus went to apply for a loan to expand his small business, and the loan officer looked at him like he had 2 heads. He told Marcus that his debt-to-income ratio was catastrophic. Marcus laughed, thinking there was a mistake. But then the officer pulled the credit report, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, delinquent accounts. Marcus didn't even know existed. Names of banks he'd never heard of. It was all there in black and white. His life, his credit, his future, it had all been compromised by the person he trusted most in the world. When he went home and confronted her, Elena didn't break. She didn't apologize. She doubled down. She told him that he must have been hacked or that his identity was stolen. She even went as far as to create fake emails from a fraud investigator to keep the lie going for another 2 weeks. Can you imagine the level of commitment that takes? To look the person you love in the eye, seeing the pain and the fear in their soul, and to keep lying? That's not just a mistake, that's a pathology. It was only when Marcus threatened to call the police and file a report that she finally admitted to some of it. But even then, she wasn't honest. She admitted to maybe 20% of the debt. She was still trying to manage the narrative. She was still trying to save the image. That's when they ended up in my chairs. I watched them during the commercial breaks. I watched the way she smoothed her skirt and checked her reflection in the monitor. She was still performing. She thought she could come on this show, give a few excuses about motherly pressure, shed a few tears, and I'd tell Marcus he needed to be more supportive. She didn't realize that I don't play that game. My job isn't to make you feel good. My job is to get you real. And we were about to get very real very fast. When the camera started rolling, I looked at Elena and I didn't see a villain. I saw a scared little girl in a grown woman's clothes, still trying to win a game that had no winners. I've seen this 1,000 times. It's a phenomenon I call the performance trap. She wasn't just buying things, she was buying an identity. She was purchasing the feeling of being enough. But the problem with trying to fill an internal void with external things is that it's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. You can pour in all the designer clothes, luxury vacations, and high-end home decor you want, but at the end of the day, the bucket is still empty. And Marcus was the one paying for the water that was leaking out. I looked her dead in the eye and I asked her a very simple question. I said, Elena, do you love Marcus more than you love the image of your life? She hesitated. That split second of silence told me everything I needed to know. She wanted to say yes, but she didn't even know who she was without the image. She had spent so long, curated her life for social media and the neighbors, that she had become a stranger to herself. I told her, you've been living a double life. You're like a secret agent, but instead of protecting your country, you're sabotaging your own family. She started to cry then, but it wasn't the kind of cry that signals a breakthrough. It was a defensive cry. It was the cry of someone who's been caught and is looking for a way out. She started talking about how she wanted the children to have the best, how she didn't want them to feel less than their friends at school. I had to stop her right there. I told her, don't you dare hide behind those children. You didn't do this for them, you did this to them. You've traded their financial security, their father's peace of mind, and their mother's integrity for a bunch of stuff that's going to end up in a garage sale in 5 years. You're using your kids as a shield to protect your own ego, and that is a low blow. That's when Marcus finally spoke up. His voice was shaking, not with anger, but with a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. He said, Elena, I would have lived in a shack with you. I would have driven a rusted-out truck for 20 years if it meant I could trust you. I didn't need the house. I didn't need the country club. I needed a partner. And I realize now that for the last 6 years, I've been sleeping next to a stranger who was systematically dismantling our future. The look on his face was heartbreaking. It's the look of a man who realized he had been an unwitting accomplice in his own destruction. I turned back to Elena. I had the full credit report in my hand, the one my team had spent 48 hours verifying. I held it up. It was thick, dozens of pages long. I said, you told Marcus the debt was $50,000. You told my producers it was maybe $80,000. I have the numbers right here, Elena. The total is $482,000, nearly $500,000 of unsecured debt. Most of it is in collections. Some of it is tied to high-interest predatory loans you took out using Marcus's forged signature. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a criminal enterprise. The audience gasped, but Elena just went pale. The mask finally started to crumble. She looked like she was going to faint, but I didn't let up. I couldn't. You can't heal a wound if you don't clean it out first. And this wound was infected to the core. I asked her, what did you buy? Show me the $500,000. She couldn't answer because she didn't buy anything of lasting value. She bought moments of feeling superior. She bought the feeling of being the woman who had it all. It was all smoke and mirrors. I looked at Marcus and I said, Marcus, you've been a victim here, no doubt about it, but we have to talk about your role in this. How do you live with someone for 6 years and not see that the math doesn't add up? How do you not see 14 credit cards? How do you let someone else have total, unchecked control over your financial destiny? I wasn't blaming him, but I was challenging his passivity. In any relationship, if you check out, you're giving the other person permission to do whatever they want. He had chosen to be blind because it was easier than facing the conflict. He liked the lifestyle too, even if he didn't realize how it was being funded. He enjoyed the perfect home and the perfect wife. He accepted the fantasy because he didn't want to deal with the messy reality. This is the part of the process that people find the most difficult. It's the inventory phase. I made them sit there. I told Elena, you're a financial addict. You get a rush from the spend, and then you get a rush from the successful lie. You're addicted to the deception. And to Marcus, I said, you're an enabler. You've been a silent partner in your own bankruptcy. The atmosphere in the room changed. It went from a he said, she said drama to a deep psychological autopsy. We weren't talking about money anymore. We were talking about character. We were talking about the fundamental pillars of a marriage: trust, honesty, and shared reality. When those are gone, you don't have a marriage. You have a business arrangement based on fraud. Elena finally broke. She really broke. The defensive posture disappeared. She slumped in her chair, and the tears started flowing for real this time, the heavy, ugly, snot running down your face kind of tears. She admitted that she felt like a failure every single day. She admitted that every time she swiped a card, she felt a bolt of terror in her chest, but she couldn't stop. She was terrified that if she stopped, the whole world would see she was just a girl from a trailer park who didn't belong. There it was. The core belief, the shame that was driving the bus. I told her, Elena, your father didn't love you for who you were. He loved you for what you did. And you've been trying to do enough to earn Marcus's love. But here's the irony. By trying to earn his love through perfection, You've actually destroyed the very thing that would have made him love you forever, your soul. It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that the very thing you thought was saving you was actually the thing killing you. We sat in that silence for a long time. It was the first honest moment they had shared in years. There were no lies, no masks, no performances. Just two broken people sitting on a stage looking at the wreckage of their life together. But as I told them, you can't start building a new house until you clear away the rubble of the old one. We were finally standing on the bare ground. It was ugly, it was barren, but it was real. And real is the only place where you can find a solution. I told them that the road ahead was going to be the hardest thing they'd ever done. This wasn't going to be fixed by a sorry and a hug. This was going to require years of restitution, not just financial, but emotional. Marcus had to decide if he could ever look at her and not see the person who robbed him. Elena had to decide if she could ever look in the mirror and like the woman staring back, even if she was wearing clothes from a thrift store. After the cameras stopped rolling for that segment, the silence in the studio was heavy. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows a great performance. It was the kind that follows a car crash. People were stunned. My crew, who has seen just about everything, was standing still. I walked off the stage for a moment to let the weight of that $482,000 figure sink in. I went to my dressing room, took off my mic, and just sat there for a minute. I needed to wrap my head around the sheer scale of the deception. You see, when someone lies on that level, they aren't just hiding a few secrets. They have constructed an entirely parallel universe. They have lived every single hour of every single day for years in a state of high alert tactical maneuvering. I went back out to the green room where Elena and Marcus were sitting separately. The perfect couple was gone. In their place were two people who looked like they'd been hit by a freight train. Marcus was staring at a spot on the carpet, his hands trembling. Elena was curled up in a chair, looking small and fragile. But I knew better than to just offer a shoulder to cry on. I had to be the one to tell them that the hard part hadn't even started yet. The reveal is just the beginning. The repair is where most people fail because they want a shortcut. They want a pill, a hug, or a magic wand to make the debt and the hurt go away. But there is no magic wand for a $500,000 hole in a shattered soul. I sat down across from them, leaning forward, looking them both in the eye. I told them, listen to me and listen close. We are at a crossroads. We can either spend the next year litigating the past, which will lead you straight to a divorce court and a bankruptcy filing that will haunt you for a decade, or we can start a radical, scorched earth reconstruction of your lives. But that only happens if the lying stops right now. Not mostly stops, not mostly honest. I mean absolute surgical transparency. Elena looked at me, her eyes red and puffy. She whispered, I don't even know how to be honest anymore, Dr. Phil. It's like I have a voice in my head that tells me to lie before I even realize I'm doing it. It's a reflex. That was the most honest thing she'd said all day. And it's a terrifying admission. It's what I call automaticity. When you've practiced a behavior for so long, in her case, the behavior of image management, it becomes an autonomous function of the brain, like breathing or blinking. She was addicted to the save she felt every time she successfully deflected a question or hit a bill. I explained to her that she was a crisis junkie. She had created a life of constant, low-grade emergency so she could feel the temporary relief of surviving it. I turned to Marcus, and I said, you have to stop playing the martyr. You've been walking around with your eyes shut because you didn't want to see the truth. You liked the nice house. You liked the leather seats in the SUV. You like that? Your wife looked like $1,000,000. You didn't ask questions because you didn't want the answers. You were a willful ignoramus. You traded your oversight for a comfortable fantasy, and now the bill has come due. Marcus didn't get angry. He just nodded slowly. He knew I was right. He had been a co-pilot on this flight, even if he wasn't the one with his hands on the controls. He had ignored the warning lights because he wanted to believe the destination was as beautiful as the brochure promised. The next few hours were an intensive deep dive. I brought in a forensic accountant and a high-level marriage therapist who specializes in betrayal trauma. We started peeling back the layers of the onion. We found out that Elena had even taken out a small business loan in Marcus's name by forging his professional credentials. She had been paying the monthly minimums by selling their furniture on various apps and replacing it with cheap knockoffs that looked identical from a distance. It was incredible. The level of detail was mind-boggling. She was a master of the long con, but she was conning the people she loved most. What really struck me during this process was the why. As we talked about her childhood, the patterns became even clearer. Her father had been a man who equated worth with wealth. If they had a new car, they were good. If they struggled, they were trash. Elena had internalized that binary code. She truly believed that if Marcus found out they were struggling, he would see her as trash and discard her. She wasn't just buying clothes, she was buying insurance against abandonment. It was a tragic, broken logic. I told her, Elena, you've been trying to buy Marcus's love with Marcus's money. Do you see how insane that is? You've been stealing his future to pay for a present that he didn't even want. We spent a lot of time talking about the kids. They had 2 young daughters, 7 and 9 years old. These girls were growing up in a house where stuff was the primary language of affection. If they did well in school, they got a new toy. If they were sad, they went shopping. Elena was teaching them the same toxic curriculum she had learned from her father. She was setting them up for the same cycle of debt and despair. That was the moment Elena really started to crumble. When she realized she was poisoning her daughter's futures with her own insecurities, the performance died for good. I told them that the first step was a total financial lobotomy. All credit cards were to be destroyed. All accounts were to be merged and monitored by a third-party fiduciary. Elena was to have no access to money beyond a small, cash-only weekly allowance for groceries. Every receipt had to be logged. It sounded harsh, almost like a prison sentence, but for a financial addict, it's the only way to achieve sobriety. You can't tell an alcoholic to just drink a little bit, and you can't tell a compulsive spender to just be careful. You have to remove the drug entirely. Marcus was hesitant. He didn't want to be his wife's warden. He said, I don't want to live like that, Dr. Phil. I don't want to spend my life checking receipts. I told him, then you might as well leave now, because if you don't provide the structure, she will find a way to slip back into the shadows. You have to be the guardrails until she learns how to drive again. It's not about being a warden, it's about being a partner in her recovery. If you're not willing to do the work, don't waste my time and don't waste hers. This is the escalation of the healing process. It's the realization that the fix is actually harder than the problem itself. It's easy to spend money you don't have. It's incredibly hard to live on a strict budget while paying back a mountain of debt with high interest rates. It means no more country club, no more designer shoes, no more private lessons for the kids that they can't afford. It means a total lifestyle ego death. I watched them process this. I could see the wheels turning. Elena was terrified of what the neighbors would think. Marcus was terrified of the sheer weight of the labor ahead. But for the first time, they were looking at the same map. They were finally in the same reality. And that, in and of itself, was a victory. Before they left the studio that day, I made them sign a contract, not a legal one, but a personal one, a contract of total transparency. I told them that if I found out one more lie, even a small one, I was done with them. I don't have time for people who want to play games. Life is too short and the stakes are too high. As they walked out to the car, Marcus put his arm around her. It wasn't a warm embrace. It was more like two soldiers leaning on each other after a brutal battle. They were wounded, they were exhausted, and they were facing a very uncertain future. But they were walking together, and as I watched them go, I wondered if it would be enough. I've seen people come back from the brink, and I've seen people dive right over the edge. The difference is always the same. It's the willingness to be real when it hurts. We weren't done with the confrontation just because the cameras had stopped that first day. In fact, that was just the opening salvo. I had them come back to my office the following morning because I knew that once the adrenaline of being on television wore off, the old habits would start creeping back in. I've seen it happen 1,000 times. The showroom epiphany, where someone says all the right things under the bright lights, but the moment they get back to the hotel or the airport, they start negotiating with the truth again. They start telling themselves that maybe I was too harsh, or maybe the numbers weren't actually that bad. I couldn't let that happen, not this time. The stakes were too high, and the hole they dug was too deep. I sat them down, and I didn't say a word for a long time. I just let the silence sit in the room. Silence is a powerful tool. Most people are terrified of it because in the silence, you have to listen to your own thoughts. Finally, I looked at Elena. I said, "You spent your whole life running from the feeling of being ordinary. You thought that being ordinary was a death sentence. But let me tell you something, Elena. Ordinary is honest. Ordinary is sustainable. Ordinary is being able to look your husband in the eye without a script. You've been living a high-stakes thriller, and you're exhausted. Aren't you tired of the lies? Aren't you tired of the secret phone calls and the hidden mail?" She didn't even try to defend herself this time. She just whispered, "I'm so tired, I feel like I'm disappearing." That was the breakthrough. That was the moment the perfect Elena finally died so the real Elena could have a chance to breathe. When you reach that level of exhaustion, you stop fighting the medicine. I told her that she had to go home and do something she'd never done. She had to tell her children the truth in an age-appropriate way. She had to sit those two little girls down and tell them that Mommy made some very big mistakes with money and that things were going to be very different for a while. No more yes to every toy. No more yes to every expensive activity. They needed to see their mother take accountability. Because if she didn't show them how to fix a mistake, she was just teaching them how to hide one. Then I turned to Marcus. I told him, "You're hurting, and you have every right to be. You've been betrayed in the most fundamental way, but you have a choice to make. You can either be a victim for the rest of your life, or you can be a leader. If you stay with her just to punish her, you're wasting everyone's time. If you're going to stay, you have to stay with the intention of rebuilding, not just surveilling. You have to decide if the woman, she is the broken, honest version, is someone you can love. Because the woman you thought you married never existed. She was a character in a play that she wrote, produced, and directed." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at the image, he was looking at the woman. He asked her, "Who are you, Elena? If we take away the house and the cars and the clothes, who am I even married to?" She didn't have an answer yet. And I told him that was okay. You don't find out who you are in a day. You find out through the choices you make when things are hard. I gave them a series of homework assignments that were designed to strip away the artifice. They had to go through every single room in their house and identify every item that was bought with blood money, the money that came from those secret loans. They had to sell it. All of it. I didn't care if it was a lamp or a dining room table. If it was a monument to a lie, it had to go. It's what I call a cleansing of the temple. You can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. The outcome of this wasn't a happily ever after in the traditional sense. It was much grittier than that. Over the next 6 months, they moved out of their sprawling suburban home and into a modest 3-bedroom rental. They sold the luxury SUVs and bought 2 used reliable sedans. Elena started working a job in a retail warehouse, not as a manager, but as a clerk. She needed to feel the weight of a dollar earned through honest labor. She needed to see that she could survive without being the queen of the neighborhood. It wasn't easy. There were nights when Marcus wanted to leave. There were nights when Elena almost opened a new credit card just to feel that old hit of dopamine. But they had the support system we put in place. They had the forensic accountant who was still monitoring every penny. They had the therapy, and most importantly, they had the truth as their North Star. One of the most profound moments happened about 4 months after the show. Elena sent me a letter. In it, she described a Saturday afternoon with her daughters. They weren't at a theme park or a high-end mall. They were at a public park, flying a $10 kite they'd bought with cash. She said it was the first time in her life she felt light. She wasn't worried about who was seeing her. She wasn't worried about the bills in the mailbox. She was just a mom with her kids in the grass. She said, "Dr. Phil, I used to think that being enough meant having everything. Now I realize that being enough means having nothing to hide." Marcus eventually found a way to forgive her, though the scars remained. The trust wasn't fully restored, maybe it never would be, but it was being rebuilt on a foundation of reality. They were no longer 2 strangers living in a movie set. They were a team facing a massive debt together. They had a war room in their new kitchen where they tracked their progress on a whiteboard. Every $1,000 paid off was a victory. Every month of honesty was a milestone. This story matters because it's a warning to anyone who thinks that their image is more important than their integrity. You can fool the world for a long time. You can put on the suit, drive the car, and flash the smile. But eventually, the bill always comes due. And when it does, the interest rate is your soul. Elena and Marcus were lucky. They got caught before they lost everything. They got caught while there was still enough of a foundation left to build on. I think about them often when I see people on social media flaunting lives that look too good to be true. I want to reach through the screen and tell them that it's okay to be ordinary. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to be real. Because at the end of the day, when the lights go down and the audience goes home, you're the only one who has to live with the person in the mirror. And if you don't like that person, no amount of money or stuff is ever going to fix it. The truth didn't just blow up on my stage. It cleared the ground so something real could grow. It was painful, it was ugly, and it was the best thing that ever happened to them. They traded a perfect lie for a difficult truth, and in my book, that's a winning trade every single time. They're still working, still paying, and still talking. And that's as real as it gets. I've often said that you don't change what you don't confront, and you don't confront what you don't acknowledge. For Elena and Marcus, the acknowledgement was the most brutal part of the process because it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the lost years. It was about the birthdays celebrated with money that wasn't theirs and the anniversaries toasted with champagne bought on a credit card that was essentially a ticking time bomb. When they sat in my office for the final follow-up, months after that initial explosion on stage, the change in the room was palpable. The air didn't feel heavy with secrets anymore. It felt light, almost thin, the way it feels after a massive storm has cleared out the humidity. We talked a lot about the why one last time. People always ask me why I spend so much time on the past when the problem is in the present. It's because the past is the blueprint for the present. If you don't understand why you built the house crooked the first time, you're just going to build it crooked again on the same foundation. Elena had to realize that her need for more was actually a hunger for belonging. She felt like she didn't belong in the world she had fought so hard to enter. She felt like an imposter. And when you feel like an imposter, you overcompensate. You buy the loudest car, the biggest house, and the flashiest clothes because you're terrified that if you stop moving, if you stop performing, everyone will see the trailer park girl she was so ashamed of. I told her, Elena, that girl from the trailer park was a survivor. She was tough, she was resourceful, and she had more integrity in her pinky finger than this perfect version of you has in her whole body. You didn't need to kill her off to be successful. You needed to embrace her. That hit her hard. You could see the shift in her eyes. She realized she had been at war with herself for 20 years, and the only casualties were the people who actually loved her. Marcus had his own mountain to climb. Forgiveness isn't an event, it's a process. It's a choice you have to make every single morning when you wake up and remember what happened. He told me that for the first few months, every time Elena went to the grocery store, his heart would race. He had checked the bank app on his phone every 10 minutes. He was living in a state of hypervigilance, which is a form of PTSD. I had to tell him, Marcus, you can't heal in a crouched position. If you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, you're never going to walk forward. You have to decide if you're going to trust the process or if you're going to spend the rest of your life as a forensic investigator. He chose the process. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were times when the debt felt like an anchor dragging them to the bottom of the ocean. They had to settle with collectors. They had to deal with the embarrassment of family members finding out the truth. And they had to explain to their friends why they were no longer going on the annual ski trip. But in that pruning process, they found out who their real friends were. The people who stayed weren't there for the luxury, they were there for them. The kids, surprisingly, were the most resilient. Children don't need stuff nearly as much as they need presents. Elena realized that for years, she had been present in body but absent in mind, always worrying about the next bill or the next lie. Now, even though they were living in a smaller house and eating simpler meals, they had a mother who was actually there. They had a mother who wasn't snapping at them because she was stressed about a hidden credit card statement. They traded a playhouse for a home, and that's a trade any kid would make in a heartbeat. I look back at that transcript sometimes when I'm dealing with other families in similar situations. It serves as a reminder that the truth is a surgical instrument. It cuts, yes. It causes pain, absolutely. But it also removes the cancer. If Elena had kept going, she would have ended up in prison for fraud, or Marcus would have had a heart attack from the stress, or their marriage would have ended in a bitter, high-conflict divorce that would have scarred those girls forever. By blowing it up on my stage, we gave them a chance to rebuild from the ground up. There's a freedom in having nothing left to hide. When you've lost everything that didn't matter, you're left with the things that do: integrity, character, and genuine connection. I remember the last thing Marcus said to me before they left. He said, Dr. Phil, I'm broke, I'm tired, and I'm working 2 jobs. But for the first time in 6 years, I can sleep through the night because I know exactly who I'm waking up next to. That's the goal. Not a perfect life, but a real one. Because a real life, even with all its flaws and debts and struggles, is the only one worth living. You can't build a future on a lie. No matter how pretty you paint it, you have to start with the truth, as ugly as it might be, and go from there. Elena and Marcus are still on that journey. They'll be paying off those debts for a long time, but they're paying them together. And that, in my world, is a success story. It's not a Hollywood ending, but it's a human one. And at the end of the day, that's the only kind that matters.